Should you merge before you apply, or should you apply after you merge? Well, I don't know. Let's ask someone else. What's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, nedinthecloud.com. Welcome to Terraform Tuesday. Today, a little bit different of a show. I'm actually going to have a guest on the episode. Soren Martius is from Terramate, and he wrote an excellent blog post that talks about Terraform workflows and the eternal question of should you apply after merge or apply before merge. Let's see what he has to say. Well, Soren, welcome to Terraform Tuesday. This is like the second time I've ever had a guest, so it's kind of cool. And I'm really glad you could be the guest because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this blog post you wrote talking about workflow options and the order in which you do things. But before we get into that, why don't you take a moment and just tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your experience working with Terraform?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Ned, for getting me on the pod. I'm super exciting to be a guest here and to spend the next couple of minutes talking about all things Terraform and workflows. Quickly about myself, I'm Soren. So I happen to be the founder of Terramate. We're sort of an end-to-end platform for builders in the infrastructure as code space. So Terramate does a bunch of things with orchestration, code generation, drift management, observability, asset management. And I think what we are trying to do here is to build a end-to-end solution, really, compared to all the different silo solutions out there. It's open source. Part of it is closed source. And yeah, so I also have, similar to you, I guess, quite a bit of experience with Terraform. So I've been in that space for somewhat like seven years now or so. And prior to Terramate, I ran a consultancy where we worked with a lot of Europe's most thriving scale-ups, I would say. So some of the biggest and fastest growing companies out there, which was really cool for me personally to learn because and I would say typically in consulting, you always ever work with two types of customer, either companies that don't know what they're doing and they want to learn from you, or companies that know what they're doing and they need support and help. And we were sort of in the middle. So I think we've seen both, which means a bunch of problems at a scale that was really great to be part of solving those, and then also a lot of greenfield and totally messed up brownfield projects, which I think is just the reality how most of the Terraform environments out there look like. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did consulting for about almost 7 years as well. And during that time, I did get to see a lot of brownfield deployments where I was like, what were they thinking? But I guess, and you can tell me if you had the same experience. Initially, I wanted to be like, why are you doing it this way? But then I realized that usually they did have reasons
Yeah.
for why they built it that way. And now they're coming to me and the company for help to migrate to a better way. But it's not that they were stupid or they didn't know what they were doing. It was they needed to solve a business requirement. And this was the best way they could cobble it together. And now things have shifted and they want to find a better way.
Yeah, totally agree. So I haven't met that many stupid people in that space. That's the good news here, and I think I can totally agree that especially when you first start implementing something, it's a lot about shipping business value and then trade off between time and perfection, I guess.
Mhm.
Whereas time is most likely the crucial factor. So there's two aspects to it. I think as a company grows, patterns that worked yesterday will not work tomorrow anymore. Same as
Right.
architecture and approaches, but also in Terraform specifically, there's so many ways to roam. There's so many different approaches of doing things, and also so much confusion in the industry. And like, okay, shall I use a directory-based approach, similar to what, for example, TerraGrant or we at Terramate are using very heavily? Shall I use Terraform CLI workspaces? Where's the difference between CLI and cloud workspaces? And how do I structure my models? And I just think that there's a lot of misinformation out there and
Mm.
misconception out there, and really hard for people to grasp and see through the fog. Which for me means, if I look back at the time, um, if I look at back at 100 different architectures, none look like the others. So it's like it's always a totally different approach, and maybe some similar mechanics or so. But I haven't seen much consensus among architectures, and especially if you look at various industries, engineering teams, etc. So yeah, and I guess that's one of the main problems that we have in infrastructure as code, or that we have in Terraform, that there's no commonly agreed standard pattern, and even worse, naming.
It's the two hardest things
Yeah,
in programming, right? Naming things and cache coherence.
yeah. I'm really bad with caching, but I'm really good with naming. Yeah.
So, I think one of the things I encountered was things that worked when the company was at a smaller scale stopped working as they scaled up and tried to introduce automation. And Terraform definitely fell in that bucket where it was just like some guy was running it on his laptop. And then now suddenly you need to ship that laptop in production. And how do you automate Terraform properly? In your post, you talked about two common workflow approaches. So maybe we can talk about those two different approaches and sort of like why you would do it one way versus the other and plus and minuses. So you talked about apply after merge versus apply before merge. Can we first just like set some bounds around what the workflow looks like regardless of those two approaches and then dig into each approach?
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So some questions in there to untangle. Let's address each by their own. By the way, you'd be surprised, or probably you know that, to see how many even big organizations out there still run Terraform without any automation. So I always thought that would be in total edge case or so, but the reality is that is not the case. So many organizations, especially when they start adopting Terraform or so, they may not adopt automation for months or even years, which came to me a total surprise. But it's just what I see by looking to various potential customers or also open source users at TerraMate. So now, coming back to your original question, different workflows in Terraform, as you said, apply before merge or apply after merge, right? And the question here is, so basically, if we look at how we introduce changes to our Terraform code base and then how we deploy those. So typically, an approach that we, or I at least, highly advocate for is, say you have a stable branch in a Git repository, right? The Terraform code is versioned in a Git repository. You have a stable branch, and nowadays we like to call it main, right? And now, in order to introduce a change done by an individual or team, what you would typically do is you would open up a feature branch, start changing code inside of this feature branch, and then at some point you would merge this back to the main branch, right? So doing
Right.
so, you can do all sorts of things, right? Folks can start reviewing your changes by using a pull request. You can add automation here to do all sorts of integration tests, like code style validation, checking the integrity of tests, and then more patterns, like, for example, predicting cost or checking if vulnerabilities are detected, if the code is sane and secure, etc. So this is all possible. However, the main question around workflows is, how do you eventually deploy? And deploying means basically running Terraform apply in the sense of deploying the changes introduced by the changes to Terraform, right?
Right.
So now what's important here to understand is that Terraform has this concept of state, right? And the state, in an easy manner, in a nutshell, basically just describes the state of your latest Terraform deployment. So what has happened last and what were the changes introduced. And the different approaches here is, as said by you, apply before merge, which basically means we would run Terraform apply inside of a pull request, right?
Okay.
And then apply after merge, which would mean we merge the pull request back to main, and then from the main branch, we run Terraform apply.
Okay. Yeah, that second one, the apply after merge, is the one that I feel like I've encountered more often, and it's the one that I tend to teach when I'm explaining it to people. Because for whatever reason, for me, it just makes intuitive sense. I merge the change to my code first, and then I apply the changes out, because that's how I would, if I was developing a piece of software that I was going to deploy out to things, I would be building a release from the main branch. I wouldn't be building a release from my feature branch. So the deployment would happen after that merge. So for, in my mind, like Terraform should follow that same pattern.
Yeah.
Um, what are some what do you think are some benefits to following that pattern? And then what are some potential drawbacks to doing apply after merge?
Yeah, good question. And you're totally right by saying this is how GitOps should be done as it's written in the books. Huh? I would say, however, the reality is that it's not that easy. And if you look at the market, how people think about it is pretty much 50-50.
Mhm.
So 50% and of the people that at least I encounter are highly opinionated towards using apply before merge versus apply after merge, which is 50% uses apply after merge, and it's a dogmatic topic that is highly discussed ever since. So by writing this blog post, I actually wanted to and bring my opinion to the equation. I know that there's other people that did that before. There's some blog posts from the past few years. Gruntworks issued a great blog post. I think Digger, which is also an open source runner, added a blog post here. Okay, so by looking at the benefits, comparing one and another. So basically, as one big problem, or the biggest problem in Terraform, is that if we run Terraform plan and we get a plan as a result that looks good for us, that actually doesn't mean that we can also deploy that. And why is that? Why is this? Because typically there is some sort of edge cases that Terraform cannot detect at plan time.
Mm.
And if you look in the detail, it's actually not so much Terraform's fault, but it's always related to the underlying cloud APIs and how the providers are structured. So I just want to make sure that we get the sentiment right here. But to mention some examples, if you run into quota, for example, let's say you deploy in VPC on AWS, the plan looks amazing, right? Everything is good. You hit the deploy button, bam, the deploy fails because you run into quota. That would be typical case. And what you see all the time is that when people use apply after merge, which is, by the way, the significant easier workflow, is that, right, I've reviewed my changes, I've hit the merge button, and now my Terraform deployment is running, and unfortunately it fails.
Mhm.
So for me to fix that, what I need to do is I need to open up a new pull request, right? And I need to start fixing the broken main branch, because that's what happens, right? The main branch should always act as a single source of truth and reflect the reality, which is also then kind of true in this case, right? But it's broken.
Right.
So I would need to address this right away and introduce a hotfix. And this is typically where this yak shaving process starts, because it could be as hard as, oh, I think I just fixed it, and I merge again, and it's still not fixed. It fails again. So suddenly you end up opening 5 pull requests, your 2 cups of coffee, and an hour in later, and you still haven't fixed it. And now the people that highly advocate for apply before merge, what the theory is saying here is that, hey, so instead of running into this issue, we very much want to run an apply inside of a pull request after it has been approved by a reviewer and potentially validated by some automated checks, right?
Hmm.
But for us to do that, we need to take care of a bunch of things. So apply before merge is significantly more complex because there's edge cases that we need to consider. An edge case would be that you cannot allow another pull request to be opened at the same time and to be executed at the same time. So while
Right.
it's totally fine to have, let's say, 2 pull request opens that introduce changes to the same code part, you cannot have Terraform run in both of those, because then you have a race condition, right? One would potentially override another. That's why there are tools out there that introduce a bunch of features to help us overcome this struggle. So, for example, Atlantis, I would say, here is kind of the leading open source tool in its space. And then there's Digger. Digger is another open source tool in this space, and there's some commercial vendors. And basically, all the runners can take care of it for you. Terra Team is one, Zero, Spacelift, Scalar, etc. All of those are great products. The question remains: is that really the workflow that you should follow or not?
Hmm.
And from my point of view, or what I've been seeing a lot, similar to what you just said, is apply after merge. Is significantly easier to manage. So you don't need any additional infrastructure. You don't need any additional tooling. You don't need features that Atlantis introduced, such as PR level logs, etc. And it can run natively without any struggle on any general purpose CI/CD, right? Meaning GitHub Actions, GitLab, CI/CD, Bitbucket, Jenkins, whatever, you name it, right?
Right.
Versus apply before merge, we need to take care of those constraints that I just mentioned, meaning we need to introduce additional tooling, which typically comes at the management overhead, right? And at times at the costs and ops overhead too. So that's from a tooling perspective. From a SOAR, a SOAR management and how teams operate perspective, I think the actual issue with apply before merge is actually somewhere else, and it's how you structure your code and your root modules. So let's say that you have relatively large state files.
Okay.
Relatively large state files, and maybe you have a dev, staging, and production environment managed in a monorepository. That's like sort of what we see, I would say, all the time. Now, if you do apply before merge, it would mean if somebody introduces a change to your dev environment, which is mentioned in a single state file, this environment is locked down for this pull request exclusively, right? So this works really good when you're a small team, a handful of people. But once you scale up, and 5 people working on infrastructure code isn't really a big team, right? Like with enterprises, you start working on like dozens of repositories, dozens or hundreds of people, then things change. This is where I see apply before merge failing all the time, in the sense there's like PR level logs, conflicts, things get out of whack all the time. People apply and forget to merge. Which, by the way, there's also products that help you again overcome this. Yeah, but the question remains: is all the effort and are all those products actually worth the trade-off? By the end of the day, I would always say it depends on your specific situation. There's definitely room for both workflows. However, apply after merge, significantly easier to manage, runs natively in any CI/CD, doesn't need any additional tooling, and is easy to understand and follows sort of the GitOps paradigm, right? Apply before merge. We overcome this merge and apply dilemma, whereas we merge something back to main and then we try to apply and it fails. We need to hotfix that. Yeah, so it kind of depends.
Gotcha. So just to walk through the entire process, if I am doing merge before apply, I'm sorry, if I'm doing apply before merge, that's going to require that within the context of the pull request, if I want to trigger an apply, I'm going to have to add some sort of comment that needs to be interpreted by something else as I want to do an apply now.
Yeah,
And then if that apply fails, I don't have to worry about having merged that into main. I can just push another update to the branch that's behind the PR and then try the apply again. So I have this iterative cycle. But like you said, at the same time, if anybody else is working on that same environment, I need to make sure they're locked out of opening a PR and trying to run an apply, because then they might they might make changes to the environment that I'm not ready for. So
correct. And also, you need to, if you elaborate on this a little bit further, you also want to probably validate who is actually able to apply and who is able to run plans. Is it the entire team? Is it just specific people? So you need a sort of a concept of airbag, a role-based access control here to handle this too. Yeah, but your summary here hits it on point, I'd say. Yeah.
that is another really good point though, because in any of the like VCS platforms out there, there's a concept of approvers who can merge a pull request. That's just usually baked into the platform. So you can say, these are the people that need to review, or I can approve a pull request and actually do the merge. And these are, folks who can't, or I need at least 3 people to review this before it gets merged. That logic doesn't exist inside the pull request. That's a product of approving the pull request. So if that's the case and you want to do apply before merge, you have to build your own custom logic and controls on who can issue that, slash PR apply or whatever the comment is to kick off the apply job.
Yeah, that's correct. Spot on. And what I like particularly about GitHub and then also GitLab is this branch protection controls. As you already said, you can wheel in different approval workflows here that just natively integrate with your pull request workflow. By the end of the day, what I sort of see all the time is people that work in smaller engineering teams that are highly experienced often refer to apply before merge, as they feel more productive
Hmm.
by not having to go through this loop of if something fails on merge back to main, like opening up a pull request. But that only works for very small teams. Every single company that scales up, and scaling up could be something that's such as 10 engineers already working on Terraform, right? By the end of the day, what we see often is let's say developers to cloud DevOps engineer ratio 1 to 10, 1 to 15 or so, right? So now if I have 10 people working on the infra side, I may have 100 developers or so. Some of them may touch Terraform, most likely not though, right? When you hit that scale, which is no scale at all, right? It's like the average Series A startup or Series B startup, so to say. I would say Series B more likely startup. This is when it typically doesn't work anymore, and people move back to apply after merge. And again, for me, it really comes as a surprise. There's so many products out there that try to solve this specific problem. Whereas I think if you try to identify the root cause of this, the root cause is often more how you structure your code and how you do pre-apply validations and those kind of things. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see, and a lot of different opinions on that topic, I guess. Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up because I've dealt with flaky applies before, and then the fact that Terraform doesn't know what it doesn't know about the cloud API and the environment. And a lot of that, well, at least some of it, you can fix by adding pre and post conditions into your Terraform code. So it can do a check during a plan to say, okay, does this actually match the reality? Now, I don't know if that gets me around the quota issue, but that will get me around some other issues that exist because you can do those pre and post checks before you move forward in a plan or an apply.
Yeah, and that is true. So there is definitely ways of narrowing down the room for flaws, huh? Um, let's call it the way it is. Room for mistakes. Sorry, language. However, what I also see is that quite often the teams don't really spend the time and even exploring those. So most of the environments out there, it's about the power curve in infrastructure is kind of an inverted power curve. It's like initially you have a lot of effort writing infrastructure code, deploying stuff, but then as it goes into the ongoing lifecycle management, is probably you don't touch your code so often anymore, which is also sort of the promise of the cloud, right? Like we take care of the whole day two management for you and scaling and SSCD and whatnot. And in Terraform, that just leads to a lot of code that is written once and then never touched again, or barely touched again. And when it comes to things such as conditions, checks, etc., in Terraform, I just see very few teams using that. What it would be another potential solution, and here I'm just thinking out loud, is that if we would get a little bit more work done on the provider level, because I think the way that it works as of today is that we could basically query APIs such as quota APIs in clouds and understand if we have the required capacity to do the deployment that we want to do. But as
Right.
of today, the providers don't really have those capabilities built in there. So it's different layers of limitations here. I would say it's always starting by looking at myself. How much effort do I put in to negotiate those? And then if you go down the stack or up the stack, and then you would look at the provider. So not so much a Terraform specific problem, but a provider specific problem, and then eventually cloud APIs, which also, as we know, like to change and deprecate all the time, and yeah, quite an interesting phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you put it that way because, like, for instance, I know the Azure RM provider. I still don't think it does it, but at least for a period of time, you could specify a virtual machine size that doesn't exist, and it wouldn't catch it during plan.
Yeah.
It would only catch it during apply. They may have fixed that since then, but it would be so simple to add into the provider as part of the plan. Just check and make sure that that size exists in that region, and if it doesn't, kick back an error.
Yeah. Fun fact on this side, I'm not so advertised with Azure. All I actually know about the Azure provider I learned here in your YouTube channel. Um, I came up with some Terraform tutorials for Azure, and I had some provider-specific questions, so they were all resolved by you, I guess. Thanks for that. Other than that, I can't say much about Azure, but what I can say is that Google Cloud AWS, for example, I know pretty much inside out. And that's the same. It's the same thing. So often, maybe not the instance size, but often too, you can add configuration parameters to resources in Terraform that are just not sane and Antigua, and those you could easily catch at runtime.
Right.
Easily do provider-based validation. But yeah, the provider development in Terraform is a whole different discussion topic that is also quite interesting, and it depends on who drives the development behind the provider. What's the like in AWS, things change so quickly that we need to already catch up by adding new resources and removing resources that deprecated and whatnot. So yeah, it's a different topic, I guess. Yeah.
Well, maybe I need to have someone on from the AWS provider or Azure RM provider team and chat with them about what they see on their side of things and what their perspective is on how they decide, all right, I need to work on this feature versus
Yeah.
another. But that's an episode for another time. Soren, before I let you go, is there anything you want to mention, plug, where people can find you, or a little bit more
Yeah.
about Terraform?
So thank you so much for having me on the pod, first of all. Really appreciate it. Always fun talking to you. If you guys want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter. So it's Soren Martius, or on LinkedIn. So feel free to get in touch. Again, I'm pretty active in the open source ecosystem, really around all things infrastructure as code and cloud, I would say. So always happy to have a chat. If you want to have an opinion about how you think how you're doing things on your end, your organization, workflows, etc., again, more than happy to help. So thanks for having me, Ned. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks again, Soren. Thank you so much to Soren Martius for being a guest on Terraform Tuesday. I don't think we came to a final answer on the question of apply after or before merge. And the reason is there isn't a final answer. It depends. It's just not always a difficult answer, but hopefully through the conversation, you got some important decision points or reasons to choose one versus the other, and you can apply that knowledge to your unique situation. If you want to read the blog post that spurred this whole conversation, I'll include that down as a link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, keep calm, terraform on.